Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second half of our meetings today. So I will begin with a territorial acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, land on which we are broadcasting from today, is the land traditionally cared for by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. And a short moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we pause to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. So council, first item here is disclosure of pecuniary interests and the general nature of that. Does anyone have anything to declare? Seeing none, we will move straight to the staff report on winter sidewalk maintenance service enhancement recommendations. So for this item, what I'd like to suggest, if council is okay with it, is that Bob Henderson do his presentation to start with, and then we will hold questions and then do the delegations and then ask questions. So if council's amenable to that, and just if you have questions, just write them down as Bob goes through his presentation, and we'll get to questions at the end. Okay? Thank you very much. Okay, welcome, Bob.
Thank you very much. Just a point of clarification. I'm not providing a presentation, but I'm providing some introductory remarks.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you.
So good evening, Mayor McCabe and members of council and members of the public. On May 29th, 2023, a workshop was held with members of council to review a number of potential winter sidewalk clearing service enhancements proposed by staff. The proposed enhancements are intended to address specific gaps in service. Each of the service enhancements were discussed with council during the workshop, and members of council were asked to rank the services in priority. Based on the feedback provided by council and the broader community, the working group recommends that council approve a revised incremental service delivery model outlined in the report before you. The working group recommends the revised incremental model be approved because it addresses the public's main winter sidewalk maintenance concerns. It incorporates council's feedback and service priorities. It optimizes existing resources by strategically aligning services to areas within the city. It improves overall service completion time from about 72 hours down to 48 hours. And it adds incremental service improvements over time based on established priorities. As well, and finally, it's a fiscally responsible phased-in approach plan. Tonight, myself, Robin Milner, Nicole Papke, Robin Van Niekerk, and myself are available to respond to questions that you may have tonight. Thank you very much. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Bob. So as I said, we'll hold our questions until the delegations delegate. So I would like to invite Daisy Arsenault, resident of Waterloo. Welcome, Daisy. Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Okay. Anytime? Okay, so good evening to all of you, Mayor McCabe and members of council. I'd like to actually start my delegation today by acknowledging the hard work of City of Waterloo staff. You've done a lot over the past several months. I recognize that. You've listened to several citizen complaints at the Waterloo Budget Engagement Meeting, to hearing even more delegates at past council meetings. You've gathered feedback from a wide variety of citizens in person, through the Engage Waterloo, over email or social media. And you've held invigorating workshops with council several weeks ago. This high-level process and the report, in my opinion, has been produced at lightning speed and represents a progressive Waterloo that is taking equitable and inclusive active transportation seriously. So thank you, city staff. You have been so patient and you have been gracious through this process. So thank you. I would also like to thank council for your leadership and engagement in this process. The workshop that was held a few weeks ago was filled with excellent questions and feedback for staff. The high level of conversation towards equitable and inclusive active transportation made me proud to be a citizen of Waterloo, because we're moving in the right direction with active transportation. We're not just planning for today, we're planning for a changing environment and changing generations of the future of Waterloo. I appreciate your leadership and hard work as well. So I want to take a moment to remind council and staff that the city sidewalk snow clearing conversation was citizen-led and continues to be citizen-fueled. As I've advocated for better city-led winter sidewalk maintenance, along with many other advocates, I've met so many other people in Waterloo of all ages who feel strongly about this as well. They come from all kinds of socioeconomic statuses. They're diverse. They have been in Waterloo for years or are new to Waterloo. And many don't feel comfortable approaching council with their opinions. But so many people feel the city can do more. Does this report satisfy all my sidewalk snow clearing requests? Absolutely not. I have been advocating and continue to advocate for full citywide winter sidewalk maintenance, which I believe enables true, equitable, and inclusive active transportation. Having said that, for me, this report represents strong leadership on equitable and inclusive active transportation and environmental stewardship. These are indigenous principles of stewardship towards the earth and towards our economies. I believe that we owe this land on which we live environmental, sustainable solutions for equitable and inclusive active transportation. The last time I delegated, I shared how I participated in the Central Transit Corridor Community Building Strategy workshops that preceded the building of the $1 billion investment that is the Light Rail Transit, or LRT. 8 opportunities resulting from the LRT investment were identified. 1, fostering investment. 2, enhancing mobility throughout the region. 3, creating high-quality urban spaces. 4, strengthening the employment opportunity. 5, enhancing the learning experience of the university sector in particular. 6, encouraging a healthy, inclusive community. 7, greening the corridor. And 8, creating a great place to live. I feel that improved winter sidewalk maintenance helps Waterloo to support these opportunities and reap the full benefits of the LRT provides. In addition to attending community engagement workshops, I also attended the special speaker series that the region hosted. Planning experts from across the world presented to the community how an LRT investment isn't just about attracting investment to the core, but it's about getting people out of their cars and using public transportation or walking to their desired destinations. They shared that this isn't a, quote, war on cars, as they put it, as cars will always be useful to people, but it's about creating opportunities to encourage people to use their cars less, which is better for citizen health, community health, and of course, the environment. Studies were shared that support the idea of how increasing active transportation networks decreases daily car trips. When I heard about these studies, I thought they were following me around in my daily life. I had that car guilt. And I actively use a vehicle often as the easy way out to get places. But because of where I choose to live in Uptown Waterloo, I could easily choose my feet as well as public transportation. I know there are other people like me who need that extra boost to leave their cars behind and make the right choice for the environment. Safe sidewalks in the winter months help to support these goals. And I'd like to add that my kids, and including my daughter who heard me practicing before I came, said, I walk everywhere all the time. I was even on the LRT today. And my kids were a big motivation. They were young when I advocated for the LRT. And they were a big motivation as to why I advocated for it. And I'm really pleased to share that they use it regularly. They walk regularly. And they are examples to me in what they choose. And they love it. They do it also because they love it. In fact, one of my kids, we went to visit another city and they said, this isn't a walkable city. You have to drive everywhere. I don't like it. So, I was beaming about that. So if my delegations from before and now sound repetitive, it's intentional. I applaud the collaborative efforts between staff, council, and community members to prioritize equitable and inclusive active transportation in Waterloo. Our communities need it now, and our children's children will thank us for it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisy. So our next delegation is, our delegate is Leslie Maxwell from the School Travel Planning Supervisor from the Student Transportation Services of Waterloo Region. And Leslie and the rest of the delegations, you have 5 minutes to present. Thanks for coming in today.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McCabe, and thank you all for having us here to speak to you. I'm here to support greater provision of winter sidewalk maintenance service by the city and the enhancements that your staff have recommended here tonight. At Student Transportation Services, my team works to encourage active travel, as many of you know. As part of our work, we aim to collect mode split data at schools by asking elementary students in the classroom how they got to school and how they're going to get home again that night. First, I'm happy to report that in the city of Waterloo, our recent collections indicate that schools average an active travel rate of 42.5% of kids who are using active travel. That's by far the leading mode of transportation to schools in Waterloo, which is great. And it's way ahead of the national average of 25%. So give yourselves a little pat on the back. We're doing something right. But I am concerned because, on the other hand, we still have an average rate of personal vehicle use on the way to school of 37.8%. And by our math, we estimate that translates into about 6,000 trips per day in the city of Waterloo to and from school. Altogether, 3,000 to school, 3 back. Because we have 194 days of school per year, that really translates into almost 1.2 million trips over the course of a single school year. I'll let that absorb for a moment. If we add the high school kids into that mix, it'd be closer to 1.7 million trips. And this is a pretty simple trip to make on foot. We're talking about kids who, the walking distance for elementary school kids is 1.6 kilometers from the school. And the average distance that they live, of course, is about 800 meters. So we really want to cut that 1.2 million in half. And we'll work on the high school kids too, but we're aiming our sights at the elementary school kids. By prioritizing school multi-use trails in this plan will help us get there. Priority 1 service within 12 hours of a snowstorm for any city-maintained multi-use trail within 800 meters of a radius of a school zone. You're already clearing these, but not necessarily as a priority. By prioritizing them, those areas will be cleared within 12 hours, the time, before the next school day. For many, and it's, I'm sorry, I'm tripping over my words. It'll help many families know that they can rely on those paths to be passable by the second day after a storm. Recent years have brought heavy ice and freeze-thaw cycles that create various unnavigable conditions on trails because the trails tend to dip into those little floodplains, and so that's made it very difficult for a lot of students. We hear from a lot of parents who would point at that as a reason why they can't walk to school. Other local cities, of course, have conducted studies that show that winter maintenance of school MUTs contributes to a greater number of students using active transportation. So we have the proof that this will work. By clearing, and then there's other parts of this plan that really help to support kids walking to school as well. By clearing crosswalks in intersections, for instance, this plan will do even more to get us to our goal. Those windrows really present a huge barrier for parents of small children, children in hand. I've heard from many parents who are afraid of one misstep as their little ones try to to scale those, what to them are mountains. And then strollers. I've had parents who've said that they've left their stroller in the snow and had to walk back and get their car to finish the walk to school. So clearing those windrows is amazing, is going to be a real boon to my work. So thank you. And then all the accessibility supports, of course. If you're going to help the vulnerable use our sidewalks, then that's going to help the rest of the community as well. And of course, clearing snow from curb-faced sidewalks, you'll provide greater visibility between all drivers and pedestrians, but especially those who kind of slip below that sight line. So that's going to do a really great job for us, and we hope that we're here for you to do a great job of doing the encouragement piece on the other end. So thank you. This plan is a step in the right direction, and clearly I've heard tonight about all the work that the citizens have done, and I'm really grateful to them for this as well. While yes, we'd like to see all city sidewalks cleared everywhere by the city, because we could then depend on continuity of the route, we know we have to start somewhere. And we have a lot of faith in this plan and what it can provide. So we urge you to adopt it so that more students can make the active school trip more comfortably, starting as soon as this winter. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And I apologize to Daisy and to council. I forgot to ask if people had questions of the first delegation and then of now Leslie. Sorry about that, council. Does anyone have any questions? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Vasek.
Through you, Mayor McCabe. Yeah, I just was curious, Leslie, if the average trips by active transportation was looked at by season, or is it just you looked at the average overall?
It was just the average overall, and we only do a spot audit right now. Ideally, we would be able to collect that data more often, but it's really hard to get into schools to do that. So we have what we have, unfortunately, but
Very helpful data. And yeah, that's great to know. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, Leslie.
Thank you.
Okay. And the next delegate is Ashwin Anamale. Welcome, Ashwin. And you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. Last time when I was here, I complained a lot. So I feel a lot of my complaints have been heard. So I would like to extend my deepest gratitude to staff. You worked real hard on this. You made sure all our voices were heard. And I read through the report, and there are a lot of good things in it. For instance, clearing the windrows and some city-run sidewalk snow clearing. So that's a really good place to start at. At this point, I think I also have to thank the mayor and rest of council for your leadership. I'd also like to extend my thanks to Dr. Craig Sloss. He's been he's been a force to be reckoned with all his data, the way he creates all the maps and presents it, and for holding the citizens movement together. So one last thing that I would ask council is that please say yes to this proposal. Please don't say no, I'm going to be very disappointed. So please council, please consider saying yes. Staff has put in a lot of hard work. They've taken the fiscal responsibility also into account. They've taken the environment into account. They've taken our views, that is the citizens' views, also into account. And I think it's a pretty balanced report. So I'd urge you to say yes to this. Of course, I do have a few minor things there. We are still heavily reliant on bylaw, and the snow clearing trigger is at 8 centimeters. I'd ideally like to see that at 5 or something lower than that, given the fact that for cars, snow clearing happens even before a single snowflake hits the ground. But this is definitely the right way. It's the right step that we are taking. So thank you, staff. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. And yeah, I'll have my fingers crossed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashwin. Next, we have Janice. Sorry, does anyone have any questions of Ashwin? Apologies. Seeing none. Okay. The next delegate is Janice Jim. Welcome, Janice, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I just want to thank Mayor McCabe, council, and staff for listening to us and taking note of our concerns. I think my fellow delegations have covered the issues, so I won't take up more of your time. This improvement in services is a step in the right direction for road users. For many Waterloo residents, uncleared sidewalks are not just an inconvenience. It limits access to work, education, life, and essential services. We look forward to the implementation of this plan. We hope to continue to work with council and staff in improving accessibility for all Waterloo Region residents.
Thank you, Janice. Any questions from council? Seeing none, thank you very much. Okay, and our last delegate on this issue is Dr. Craig Schloss. You as well have 5 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening. My name is Craig Schloss, and I'm a resident in Uptown Waterloo. I'm here today to provide my feedback on the recommendations for improving sidewalk winter maintenance. Overall, I support the recommendations, which I think will generate a lot of benefit for our residents at a fairly low cost, and I hope you'll vote for them. While I think that the recommendations are a step in the right direction, I think it's also clear that they don't represent a complete solution, where the ultimate goal really is full clearing of all sidewalks in the city. So I would encourage you to approve the recommendations, but also look for ways where you can go further than recommended in the report. The recommendations have a fairly low cost. The tax increases over the next 3 years are only 0.4%, 0.5%, and 0.1%. Council received a report on May 29 that outlined options for higher service levels, and given the low cost of the current recommendations, I hope you will consider a few of these higher service level options. One option that looks particularly promising to me is clearing sidewalks on regional roads. The current recommendation is to do this only in Zone 1, the core of the city. In the May 29 report to Council, the cost difference between clearing regional road sidewalks in Zone 1 only and clearing in all 4 zones was only $87,000. Now there's 121,000 people in the city, so that's less than an average of $1 per person. And it looks like it would probably correspond to about a 0.1% increase in property tax. For a relatively low cost, clearing sidewalks on regional roads has a lot of value, as these tend to be arterial sidewalks that connect pedestrians to transit, businesses, and other destinations of interest. And personally, as a resident of Zone 1, I do feel a bit awkward getting this service without extending it to my neighbors in the rest of the city. So I'd be more than willing to pay an extra 0.1% in property tax if it means that residents in other zones will also benefit from clear sidewalks on regional roads. The second recommendation I would like to make is to look into whether you can change the sequencing of the recommendations. Specifically, to start sidewalk clearing on regional roads in 2024 rather than 2026, and swap it with the increased spending on bylaw enforcement, which would move from 2024 to 2026. The reason for this is that we should expect that the other initiatives are going to reduce the number of bylaw complaints, reducing the need for enforcement. At the May 29 council meeting, we saw that the location of bylaw complaints was heavily concentrated in Zone 1. So clearing regional road sidewalks earlier should have an immediate impact in reducing bylaw complaints. Moreover, city staff noted that the complaints tended to be correlated with curb-faced sidewalks, and the initiative to start clearing those sidewalks begins in 2025. So by waiting until 2026 to increase spending on bylaw enforcement, we'll have an opportunity to evaluate whether the other initiatives have been successful in reducing bylaw complaints before committing the spending. We may find that the other initiatives once the other initiatives have been implemented, the need for bylaw enforcement is lower, and that money could be spent on other enhancements instead. Finally, I'd like to address one of the counter-arguments that people raise against sidewalk snow clearing. I'll say that I'm not convinced by the objections that are raised to this proposal due to concerns over greenhouse gas emissions, or GHGs. The objections are often raised without providing context on how the amount of GHGs associated with sidewalk snow clearing compares to other sources of GHG, which raises a lot of questions. How do the GHG emissions of sidewalk clearing improvements compare to the GHG generated by clearing snow from roads or by our current sidewalk maintenance activities? We already do tolerate a certain amount of GHG as a result of winter maintenance activities, so is this GHG budget being equitably distributed among road users and sidewalk users? There's sort of an assumption implicit in the GHG-based objections to sidewalk snow clearing that some residents are entitled to services that generate GHG, but others are not. How does the amount of GHG generated by snow clearing equipment compare to the reduction in GHG resulting from residents opting to use active transit more frequently during the winter? These are all questions that go unanswered when we just state that our objection is GHG without providing additional context or elaboration. The fact that GHGs are raised in an objection against an accessibility initiative reminds us that we always need to balance climate concerns against other social justice concerns. We shouldn't be saying that we can't help a disadvantaged group just because doing so might generate some GHGs. So I'd like to close by thanking Council for taking the time to listen to my feedback today, as well as a big thank you for the staff for all your hard work on this report, as well as my fellow citizens who've been advocating so tirelessly for this issue. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Craig. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. So that's all of the delegations for tonight. So Council, we will open it to your questions of staff. And okay, we'll start with Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I'm just looking at snow loading, which is Council Priority 5, and it's a fairly big ticket item with both operating and capital costs, quite a big chunk of this overall budget. And I'm just wondering how it will specifically impact the windrows reported by residents, especially those living in the communities where there's curb-facing sidewalk, and also how it might affect the overall snow clearing capacity for sidewalks. Like, what role specifically is it going to play?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Wright. So the whole initiative of loading snow from curb-faced sidewalks is it's generally an area within the business that we receive a lot of complaints about because of the snow being pushed back and forth between the resident and the road snow plows getting it back off the road. So this initiative, really, the role is to provide a more clear sidewalk over time. The intention is to bring out snow loading crews whenever snow reaches 8 centimeters or more. Again, like all the other initiatives, the snow loading may have to occur before that if we get like low volumes of snow over time that increase over 8 centimeters of snow. But this initiative really is for addressing the complaints that we receive and providing sidewalks that are clear and free of snow for getting people around on foot.
Yeah, go ahead, Jim.
And just a quick follow-up question about that. And the timing for this being 2025 is probably associated with procurement for the capital costs?
The timing was based on partially that, but mostly because of the feedback that we received through council's priorities and ranking the services that were on the table.
Okay, and I just want to note that Montreal being cited as one of the best snow clearing services in all of North America with their completely deluxe program. Snow loading is actually one of the things that sets them apart. It is really integral to the efficacy of this program. So I just want to put that out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hamner.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, and thank you to Councillor Wright. You did ask one of my questions around the snow loading because it was ranked as a higher priority, but yet it's falling in 2025, and I appreciate that it probably is procurement as well. I was curious about the recommendation regarding bylaw enforcement and the bracket beside it that says current level. I couldn't understand if we are needing to be able to do this, we need an increase, or we've got a vacancy right now, or both.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Hamner. Thank you for the question. So this was the piloted project where we went to 3 zones. So currently that is the 3 officers we have, and it would be to maintain that, and it was funded through winter maintenance.
Great, so that's making it permanent positions.
Yes.
Thank you for that. I do have one more, if I may. And just a comment too, I'd also like to echo the comments that we heard from the delegations about all of the work that staff have done to come up with the report for us and to listen to all of the input. Is it perfect? No. Is it a better step than where we are right now? Absolutely. It's moving us, I think, in a direction that we can measure the success of it and then look to what other alternatives we have. And so to that end, I know we've got 2024 as the implementation year, and I'm sure probably everyone in this room is thinking January 2024. Can you talk a little bit more about what the actual implementation is going to be and the impact that will have on the 2024 winter season?
I feel like we're playing musical chairs.
It looks like it.
Thank you for the question through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Hamner. So the intention is to introduce the services as soon as we can. Mm-hmm. However, because we're budgeting for 2024, this year is for budgeting for the 24 to 26 program. So the intention is to get these services in place in the 24 season, so the commencement of winter in that season.
As in January to March 2024?
As in September or October of 2024.
It's just from an expectation standpoint, we need to be realistic with it. So I think that's important for people to know that things will continue as they currently are, and as we finish our processes, then that's when we're able to implement it. So it's good. It's good timing. So thank you.
Thank you for that clarification question, Councillor Hamner. Councillor Vasek.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor McCabe. 2 questions. One, that's an interesting suggestion from the delegate, from Craig, asking about reversing the order of the regional road clearance and the bylaw enforcement. So curious if you discussed that, if that came up and it's an idea. If so, what was part of that conversation? If not, is that something worth considering?
Thank you. Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Vasek. Again, we took the feedback that we received from the community, the feedback from council during the workshop in terms of what the priorities were, and we tried, the working group attempted to prioritize and put together a program that made a lot of sense in terms of both what the priorities were in terms of what we heard back, but also how we could effectively roll out the program in a logistical manner that made sense, and considering procurement processes, etc. What the delegate mentioned was interesting, but again, we had a quick turnaround timeline to turn this around and put a program together. It's certainly something that we could consider. Whether I can say that we can do that today, I would have to take it back to the working group.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'd be curious if you could take it. I don't know if you need something more from us other than that was kind of an interesting idea. I would never have thought of it. And maybe we did or didn't while we did our prioritization exercise, but is it just something you can just take back where you don't need any direction from council? I don't know if my fellow colleagues think it's also a good idea, but what's the right path forward?
Well, I was just going to say we should maybe ask the clerk, but she just stepped out of the room to say, because it may be that you just we can hear what Mr. Henderson has to say, but we could just add an amendment to amend the recommendation.
Well, I have a
when
second,
we get to that point.
I have a second one that might also require additional consideration. I'm bringing it on behalf of Councillor Bodley, who unfortunately is not here, related to the school zones. And his suggestion would be one that I would certainly second if it were not just me. But just the idea that to clear a kilometer around school zones would require 37 kilometers, or would add 37 kilometers, and would cost an additional 185,000. So he knows, and I appreciate this, that idea is not on the table, and you've recommended against it at this time. But his suggestion, again, which I thought was a really good suggestion, was: is it possible to bring back that school zone 185,000 as a menu item in the upcoming budget, just for our consideration, to see in the context of all the other asks that are coming forward, to see what the impact might be? Is that possible?
That's through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Vasic. That's something that we can certainly consider adding as a menu item to the program. The one aspect of that program that I should draw some clarifications on is that if we add an additional 35 kilometers of service to the program, that would have the impact of slowing down the overall service of the program if we didn't add any additional capital vehicles to the program, because obviously you can't do an additional 35 kilometers in the same time frame that you would with the same amount of vehicles. So it's something that we can certainly consider. Brad, if you want to add into that.
Through you, Mayor, just to Bob's comment, and there may be more questions for Bob, so I don't think I want to take that hot seat. But to clarify, yeah, we could certainly bring forward that initiative that was roughly costed at about $185,000 from an ongoing operating perspective. So for context, that's about an additional 0.2% service level increase, and obviously there would be some capital components to be considered. And so the point's well taken that would be as part of the 2024 to 2026 budget release, where you would see the full picture. We have been bringing forward various initiatives over the past couple of weeks, where different service level enhancements are being considered by council. And that's being done for various reasons, in a lot of cases due to timing. But we can appreciate that you may want the sum of all of the parts before we make additional decisions. So that's something we could definitely bring back. And I would just make one point of clarity around the bylaw enforcement, potentially, let's say, delaying that to 2026. So that would propose some challenges for Nicole and the team around maintaining the current program. So if we were to do a switch of that nature, which may lead to lower bylaw complaints, we likely would have to think about how would we fund that from a temporary framework until we get to 2026. And then that's what we've been doing right now, and that's drawing on the winter control reserve. So, I mean, it's something we could definitely take away, but I would think that we would look to maintain the current bylaw of 3 positions. And what we've taken out of this proposal is the service level increase to go to 5 bylaw officers. So just for context, we heard from council that that wasn't the preferred approach, and so we've left it at the current 3 officers. So hopefully that helps provide some context.
Yeah, can I just follow up with?
Yep, go ahead, Councillor. Okay. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that there could be some step gapping, and I appreciate the quick turnaround too. But because of the quick turnaround, it is sort of like a bit more of an iterative process, I feel like. So so I appreciate you looking into it, and that wanting to maintain that service might mean that it needs to stay on the same timeline. But good to know. And then, yeah, I don't want to speak on behalf of Councillor Bodley, but I would. One of my concerns would be the same as yours, is the intention wouldn't be like, I don't think we'd want to reduce the services you're proposing now. So it would be looking at the 185 operating and then what the capital expenses would be in order to do that sort of its own thing. So I imagine he would have that intention. I don't want to put that on him, but that would be one thing that I'd be also interested in. So thanks for flagging that. That's all my questions.
Thanks, Councillor. I would just say that to add those 2 points, that you should create make an amendment to the motion. So if you want to work on the wording of that while we take more questions. Okay. Well, we can come back to that when it's time for okay. Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Freeman.
I'm looking at the clerk. I don't think we'd have to make that part of the motion. It seems like we can give that direction to staff to just have it on the menu item. because I think it's a bit confusing exactly everything that we're asking for here. So I'd rather just give it as direction as opposed to part of the motion, because there's a bunch of pieces here. There's the 185,000 operating, and I'm not sure if that includes staff, because there could be a staff component to that. And then it's the capital, and the capital has to happen in the first year too. So it's not like the tax increase that Mr. Witzel's identified here doesn't really cover it, because we have the increase. There'd be increase in year 1, 2024, associated with the capital investment to achieve this thing. So it's a kind of a confusing motion, but it's not uncommon that staff can take direction just from our conversations. And so my suggestion is that we trust that finance staff have heard it. As chair, I've certainly heard it, and I'm sure we can put it on as a menu item, because I think it's going to be a little tricky, because we might, I'm just suggesting we have a motion today, right? If we're dissatisfied with that motion, and then we should turn it down and ask staff to come back with an alternative motion for us to consider with the full costing. Like, I'm just saying, I don't want to just keep playing with this motion when we don't actually know the full implications of the cost today, because there's, as the consideration that staff have given to this also has a bit of a staging, right? So that if we do this, it helps to unlock the other things in 2025 and 2026. And so if we're gonna go back and kind of pick and choose from the menu from before, I think it's gonna get tricky. That's just my suggestion from a finance side, because I'm cognizant of the fact, like, can you help us understand, like, kind of how much of the CPIX that we've currently committed to?
So before you respond, Brad, thank you, Councillor Freeman. I'm just going to look to the clerk to see if you would like to add some clarity to this.
Thanks for you, Mayor, and I think CMT may want to add to this, but I think that staff are comfortable listening to the feedback today, and can get back to council maybe if there's some specific answers. Certainly, some of this could come forward through the budget process, and so if there was a really deep desire to do anything specific and that information's concrete and known today, direction is always helpful. But I'll look perhaps to the Commissioner Dykstra to speak to that. Maybe it may be better to come back.
Thank you, Julie, and to Council. Yes, we can take the direction through the budget process. Formal budget documents will be prepared and shared with Council and the public, and the directions received today can support all of those documents, and the ultimate discussion and final approval with Council through the budget process into February. So we're on the right track here.
Does that work for you, Councillor Bassett?
Yeah, that's totally fine. I don't need to put a motion forward. Okay. So that just to clarify, it's the two pieces. It's the one that Councillor Waterloo was putting forward, which is about the school zones and all the potential impacts it could have. And then the other piece was following up on this, just processing and coming up with your perspective on the idea of swapping the bylaw and the regional roads. It may not be the right option, but it was a really good flag. So thanks for that. That's it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Did you have another question or comment, Councillor Freeman?
Yeah, I just thought there was value through you, Mayor McCabe, to asking Mr. Witzel to kind of outline where we are in terms of some of the commitments that we've made in conjunction with really good advice from staff. And so I'm just, so that when we're considering this report today, and if we're considering changes that could, it looks as though it's not much of a tax increase, but I guess I'm just asking council to consider it in light of a bigger picture. So if you could.
Yes, through you, Mayor, to Councillor Freeman. So currently, CPIX, which is our guiding inflationary rate, is around 5.4%. And that's in line with the budget strategy report that came last Monday. And so that would be kind of our inflationary guidance for operating impacts of base and then capital and growth. And so what we're really talking about here is a service level increase. And service level increases and in infrastructure investment increases are over and above CPIX in accordance with policy, obviously at council's discretion. So there are a few items that have been coming forward. So just, kind of as estimate numbers, the fire master plan was brought forward last Monday. And so that phasing strategy is looking at 1% to 1.4, 1.5% on an annual basis. We're now reviewing the winter sidewalk maintenance. So that is in the range of 0.4, 0.5% annually in the first 2 years, and then a little bit lower in the second year at 0.1. Later this evening, Mr. Cotter will be bringing forward some amendments around Bill 109 and some staffing implications there. And then we're looking to accelerate some staffing, and then there's additional staffing pressures as a result of, we'll say, legislation. So that's in the neighborhood of 0.3% on an annual basis. And then there's also some other items that have come forward earlier, the digital services strategy, about 0.2%. And currently staff are looking at that in the third year of the budget as there's some contract staff. So that's kind of a phasing opportunity. So kind of at an aggregate, we're looking at about 2% on an annual basis in terms of service level increases for important services. But that have been brought forward. So Councillor Freeman's point is well taken that yes, it's an additional 0.1 or 0.2%, but the budget committee is trying to balance the sum of these parts and bring forward a budget that is accomplishing a lot of this, but is also as fiscally responsible as possible. And that will all come forward in December. But we just thought it would be helpful to kind of provide some reminders here today. And we will do something a little bit different in this budget document, is that we will note these items that have been not committed, but kind of endorsed or as part of the strategy by council, and the rationale as to why those come forward early in the reports. So it's easy to see in the budget documents these decisions that we're kind of making today and last Monday. So approximately 2% service level increase for those important items, including what's proposed today. So anything that we were looking to increase would be in addition to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Brad. That's really helpful. Did you have a question? Okay.
Just to follow up, if I could just thank staff, I did want to thank you for this report. And I think one of the things that this report helps me, at least with, is it recognizes that we each ranked different things. So based on where we live and the circumstances in which we find ourselves within the city of Waterloo, we each see different priorities within our wards. And so what I see here is a report that reflects that diversity that resides within the city. And so each of us have priorities in our ward that maybe we wanted to see as number one, right? And so what staff have tried to do is both take into account everybody's number one, but also give consideration to how you sequence things, so that and I see that in, having bylaw enforcement, even though we ranked it 8, it comes up in the first year because it probably sequences in to help the other years in to come. So I think it was a tough ask that we made on this, and the workshop was a challenge. So I really did want to thank you for that, because I know that some of the capital costs, like why you have the snow loading, because you've incorporated the capital cost there in 2025, which is going to help achieve the other things thereafter. So it makes sense to me. I appreciate how you noodled through this, and I think I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions from council? I just have a couple questions. I just wanted to understand where it says about the bylaw. So I'm just looking for my question. That the snow clearing begins after 48 instead of 72 hours. How would that change if we said snow clearing begins after 24? What would you think the impacts would be?
So the time limits that are identified in the report, there's a requirement to, based on the minimum maintenance standards, to clear sidewalks within 48 hours after the cessation of a snowstorm. Currently, it's taking our crews approximately 72 hours after the cessation of a snowstorm completes to clear the network. So what we're saying is all these service enhancements that we're proposing, as well as the strategic ways in which we do business, is going to bring that timeline down to 48 hours. So we're meeting targets that are specified out in provincial legislation. I'm hoping that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. And the other thing I just wanted you to clarify was it says about leveraging technology. Can you just talk a bit about what you mean by leveraging technology?
Good question. Thank you for the question. So currently our road snowplows use technology, vehicle tracking systems, so we can use that information to see where we've missed spots or where we can improve timelines. We can use the data for, trying to find efficiencies in doing our business more efficient or faster, what have you. So we can leverage that technology and employ it in the sidewalk clearing business. And that's what we mean. We also are talking about potentially leveraging, third-party technology that might help us or citizens be able to identify problematic spots that would notify the city, and we take corrective action from that kind of technology.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And I guess I do have one other question. Just more of a comment that with the communications plan, my personal interest would be that we emphasize the accessibility opportunities for people who are not fully able-bodied, that we ensure that we do a really great job communicating that to people so that they are aware of these increased service enhancements.
Thank you, Mayor. It's an excellent point. And an updated communication plan is something we can begin to leverage for this coming winter season. It's something that we've discussed among the working group, and you'll see there's not a line item for budget around communication. We've already been in discussion about where we can leverage existing communication budgets within our divisions to support that. So we'll be seeing an updated plan for this winter around that topic.
Thank you so much. Okay, if there's no other questions from council, Councillor Hamner had indicated she would move this. Thank you, Councillor. And I'd look for a seconder, Councillor Wright. All in favor of the recommendations as provided? That is unanimous. Thank you, Council. And thank you again to our community and to staff for working quickly and diligently to make these enhancements. As I think it was Councillor Hamner said, it's not perfect, but it certainly is a very few big steps in the right direction. And we'll look to see those enhancements for the winter, the end of 2024, as winter starts. Not this winter, but next winter, which is an important clarification. And just also want to note that it's probably a really warm summer evening out there. I don't know, the windows are closed, but it's not winter right now. So thank you for those who took time to come in tonight, though, to talk about winter snow clearing. It's a credit to how passionate you feel about the subject and about the community. So thank you very much. Okay, so the next item is the inclusionary zoning, the recommended policy and implementation directions. And this is a report prepared by Michelle Lee and a presentation prepared by Michelle Lee. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mayor and Council. I have a brief presentation to make about the discussion paper that's in front of you today. And I just wanted to remind you that this initiative that we're undertaking to explore inclusionary zoning is a joint initiative between the City of Waterloo, City of Kitchener, City of Cambridge, and the region of Waterloo. So just as a refresher, inclusionary zoning is a unique policy and regulation tool that municipalities can use to require that private developers include affordable housing units within new multi-unit developments. The tool can be used in major transit station areas, And we feel that it's a great opportunity to ensure that Ion stops and the areas around those stops develop into mixed income communities. We wanted to flag that inclusionary zoning really is only one tool in a larger toolbox. It doesn't take away from many of the other initiatives that the municipality is already working on and that the community is already working on. And so the tool could be used to complement but not replace other things like not-for-profit housing, cooperatives, development by private developers to create affordable housing in exchange for capital grants, and municipal efforts to increase the overall housing supply through official plan policies and zoning regulations, and efforts to facilitate missing middle. There were 5 principles that we used to base a lot of our work on in the development of this discussion paper and the initial policy recommendations that we've made. The first is that we feel that given that the development community is going to be the body that brings forward the new units and the developments that will be subject to an inclusionary zoning bylaw, that we do need to partner with that community to come up with a policy and program that works for them as well as for the city, and that requires a bit of a balancing act. We feel that the program can operate by capturing the value that's leveraged through the new density along the Ion corridor, and we can refocus some of that new value that's created towards the provision of a public good, namely affordable housing. We're looking to develop a program that is financially sustainable over the long term so that it wouldn't require significant municipal capital or operating grants. We think that it's important that this program operate somewhat on its own, and that will allow it to work alongside with other initiatives that the city has that might be more financially intensive. We're looking at a program, or at least encouraging a program that would provide moderate affordability. This program, through our review, is not well suited to the provision of very deeply affordable units, but we think it's actually quite a good program that could provide affordable units for moderate incomes. And finally, we're looking to develop a program and policy that minimizes land market disruption. So we are making some recommendations to bring forward a program that is very gradual and very clear in its signaling of what's to come. We're also developing a framework that has to work within the rules that are set out by the province. So that includes rules that are already in place through the Planning Act, but it also includes rules that we think are likely to come forward through new regulations by the province. And these rules dictate how affordable units can be, how many units you can demand, and how long those units can be affordable. So just as a quick summary of what is contained within the discussion paper and some of the key takeaways we were hoping that Council would hear through this presentation, and that is that we're really strongly encouraging a region-wide approach. We're looking for a framework that would be an overarching framework for all 3 cities. And while there may be some minor tweaks and adjustments within each city to recognize different market areas, we feel strongly that a region-wide approach will create consistency and clarity for the development community, which will make our jobs easier in terms of implementing it, and it'll also make it easier for the development community to understand the rules. We're recommending a rental focus as the tenure for the affordable units, primarily because under the proposed regulations by the province, an affordable ownership unit would not be affordable to anybody outside of the high income bracket. We're recommending that we focus the program on affordability for moderate incomes specifically, those between the 40,000 and 58,000 income bracket. We feel that the program would work very well for that demographic and would help us achieve that balance that we're looking for between units provided versus feasibility for the developer. We're encouraging a clear and flexible framework that allows for us to reflect the market differences across the MTSAs. So We know that some markets are more viable for development than others, and we are recommending some set-aside rates that reflect those differences. And we're looking to encourage flexible options for developers so that they can innovate to find ways to make the program work for them if they find themselves in a unique situation that it makes it challenging to develop and to create and deliver the affordable units. As I mentioned earlier, we're trying to encourage a program that avoids market disruption, so we're proposing that the set-aside rates be very low initially to recognize that many developers have already invested in property and made some decisions based on the framework that was already in place. Now that we're adding a new framework, we're trying to provide a little bit of a time frame to allow developers to adjust and adapt to that new framework. And then last of all, we're recommending, partly because we have to, but also partly because it's a prudent thing to do, ongoing review and adjustment to the policy as needed. So we would be reviewing and reporting on the program every 2 years and making adjustments and tweaks based on what we see. And as economic conditions change, there is actually very likely to be adjustments to reflect hopefully improving market conditions, and then we can bring forward stronger set-aside rates that reflect that balance that we're trying to seek. I won't go into the specific policy directions today. I think they are outlined in the document in front of you today, but I have this slide up in case we need to refer to it. So that's it for me, and I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Michelle. We'll look to council for questions, and Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor, I just want to commend you on the thoroughness of this discussion paper. I love a discussion paper that sends me down a whole bunch of rabbit holes, looking stuff up and better understanding the situation. And this one quote came up in the report: inclusionary zoning is a very much imperfect solution to this problem. However, it is the best tool we have at the moment within the framework provided by the province and should be used. That was feedback from the community that was engaged. I have a couple of questions. And number one, because I know other councillors are going to ask some of the questions that are on my list, so I'll just let them ask those questions. But number one for me is really thinking through who is low income and who is moderate income, and whether it's possible in the context of the assessment report and the implementation guidelines to apply a tool like a gender-based analysis tool or an intersectionality-based analysis tool to sort of tease out maybe some of those things that could be hidden within the impacts of inclusionary zoning or missed opportunities within inclusionary zoning. I just wondered whether you had any comments about that.
Through you, Mayor. We certainly we have access to Stats Canada data, which could help us understand the demographic of those folks who are in the middle income and the low income range. If council feels that that's an important component to help in the decision making, we can definitely include that as part of our reporting back to paint a better picture of who in the community will be supported by this program.
Go ahead. And just my my follow-up question about that has to do with the literature around spatial mismatches with housing and how important it is to get the transit and employment part of housing and the affordability of housing. That triangle has to work. And so that's the particular area of interest, I think, that could potentially be unveiled by one of those equity-based policy analysis tools. And so I just wondered whether you had given any thought to the literature on spatial mismatch.
Through you, Mayor McCabe. Definitely, we actually try to avoid the term overhoused, but I think that's what you're referring to, and that is that mismatch between those who have more bedrooms than they need and then those who don't have enough bedrooms or can't afford
Yeah,
units.
it can be parking too, but.
Yeah,
right.
absolutely, yeah. And so we definitely have looked into that literature, and that kind of hits a point that we think that this inclusionary zoning program could be a very viable tool to help support that, creating more flexibility in the housing spectrum so that people can shift and move into the units that are a more appropriate spatial match for their needs. Right now we have not just a shortage of affordable units, but we have a shortage of a variety of supply of units. And we think that inclusionary zoning could help alleviate some of that pressure by creating different unit types, lower parking rates, and that kind of thing that could then appeal to those who can move out of units that then free up those units for others and move into inclusionary zoning units or vice versa. So yes, I think that's definitely something we've looked into, and we think that this is a tool that will help in that broader objective of trying to match households to appropriately sized units and appropriately parked units.
And thank you for that response. I think that captures it perfectly. But I also just want one last question, which is about this being a longer term strategy. So I'm just trying to confirm my understanding of this, that it's a longer term strategy than, say, our 2031 housing pledge, that really we would only have 12 units in Waterloo specifically come online by annually by 2031. So it's definitely part of the longer game.
Absolutely, through you, Mayor. I think if you look at the next 5 years, the number of units that inclusionary zoning could bring forward is very disappointing. What we're recommending is that we got to get in now, and this is a long game program. So in 30 years, we will be able to look back and say, we now have 1,500 units across the region that we wouldn't have had otherwise, and perhaps more if we do ramp up due to changing economic times. So I think that's a good point. This is a program that once is in place and becomes established part of how we do business, those units just start coming in, and it's a sustainable, ongoing program.
Thank you, Councillor. Other questions from members of council? Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Rowe.
Through you, Mayor. Thank you, Michelle. This is really comprehensive. I actually was just curious about duration of affordability and the 25 years. And I just made a note of exploring partnerships with nonprofits to expand that. So I just wondered if you could expand on that a little bit and what that would look like.
Through you, Mayor. We think that there's actually a great opportunity. First of all, we are restricted by the province's forthcoming regulations that we can't require inclusionary zoning units to be affordable for longer than 25 years. However, that's not to say that a provider couldn't, if they wanted to, keep those units affordable for longer than 25 years. And so what we're looking to do is try and find a program that enables private developers to partner with affordable housing providers so that they can transfer those units over to the affordable housing providers who can keep those units in community ownership for the long term. We've had a number of conversations with very interested affordable housing providers and what we're calling third sector, those that might be unique sort of cooperatives that are for profit, but they're like B corporations. And then we've also had considerable interest by the development community in trying to make that match and looking for options to innovate and be flexible and develop partnerships. One particular area that I want to point out is that because we're recommending rental tenure specifically, and we know we have a lot of condo developers who really aren't in the game of staying with their buildings over the long term. Their business plan is to sell the entire building and sell the condo units and then move on to the next project. The engagement with the not-for-profit sector is a great opportunity for them to get off the site, move on to their new project, and enable this affordable housing provider to be able to continue to provide those units. So that's that's where we see some really great opportunity and an opportunity to innovate and be flexible. And we think actually it might end up in longer term, better delivery of a program than if we were to not facilitate that partnership.
Thank you. That's very encouraging.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bodley.
Thank you, through Mayor McCabe, and not to rehash the previous conversation, but listening to the council meeting on the way to the council meeting while driving exactly the speed limit on the way here. I appreciate the conversation, so thank you. Thank you all for that. Yes, with a snowplow on the front of my car. It was really easy today, really light and fluffy. Inclusionary zoning. My first question is about the classifications of the various MTSAs, and I was just really surprised to see Allen Station and in particular Willis Way in the established area versus the prime area. I would have thought for certain that those were prime areas, and I'm wondering if there's any chance to review those market areas before this gets applied to determine whether or not it is inappropriately classified.
Through you, Mayor. I agree. I was actually quite surprised myself, and I think that's a good point. We'll take that back. I think, one, conditions may have changed since the last time of our review, so we have to keep re-reviewing. But secondly, we'll take a look at those inputs that went into the established, emerging, and prime major transit station areas and determine whether or not we still think that outcome is actually a reasonable one, and bring the results of that review forward as part of the report coming to council.
Thank you. Did you have a follow-up?
Not a follow-up, but an additional question.
Okay, go ahead.
That's okay. The second question I had was about the off-site recommendations that are in the report. So if a developer doesn't want to include the units within their development, they can have them off-site with some conditions that are listed in there. And I just wanted to highlight the one quote that frankly irked me, and I just wanted to highlight it. It states that some developers, quote, some developers expressed concern that if inclusionary zoning rents were too low, it could present marketing or operational challenges. And it really irked me because I think, like, as you pointed to, the goal of this is, to drive some units from an affordability perspective, certainly, and I appreciate that. But for me, the real important point of inclusionary zoning is having, folks from low income families living in the same building as folks from high income families. And so while I appreciate the intention of providing some flexibility to certain developers that that it might not be an ideal solution for them, I'm really concerned that we're going to see some ultra luxury condos being built, and they're going to say, no, there's a cost to doing business here, and I can just pay to have these over here. And I think that's really antithetical to the point of inclusionary zoning. And so my one suggestion to bring back to the team before this comes back around the thought here is that at least if we are allowing them to do that, there should be a further penalty. Like they should be having to have either more deeply affordable units or a greater number of units provided if indeed they are providing them off-site. So I just wanted to leave that with you. Feel free to provide some comments if you'd like, but that's just my thoughts on the whole off-site piece. Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, we can definitely take that back. I think I've heard some other comments regarding some concern that all the affordable units might be concentrated in a single MTSA or a couple MTSAs and absent from the core of Uptown Waterloo. So we do need to go through further refinement of what an off-site program might look like. We'll take your feedback and other feedback back to the group and bring something back for your consideration.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Vasek.
Yeah, through you, Mayor McCabe. I had the same concern as Councillor Bodley, and I'm just going to highlight it as well because we had slightly different thoughts, which is, I think that perhaps you require more deeply affordable units or you require more units, but I ultimately believe that if you're building something in the Uptown, you ought to have your affordable units or your moderately affordable units in the uptown as well. Like uptown is for everybody. It's not a luxury zone. It ought not to be a luxury zone. And ultimately, my goal on council has always been about highlighting income inequality in Waterloo, because there is some, and it's based on geography. And I'm not here on council to try to widen that gap. I am here to try to narrow that gap. And like Councillor Bodley said, when we are exposed to people who are different from us, we grow up entirely different. We do not have NIMBYism. And so I'd love to see not just more deeply affordable units in another, primary zone, or to move to, a secondary zone, but to remain within that zone. If you could take that back to. I actually had a question also, which is that, so currently we have a lot of employment lands in the MTSAs that would technically be eligible, but my understanding from sort of the last 4 years is that we might be looking at rezoning those MTSAs to encourage residential. Is that something that we are doing to rezone them, or looking at, not rezone, but like in the official plan, looking into changing how they're categorized, so we might actually get more units there?
Through you, Mayor. Yep, absolutely. And in fact, it was probably buried a little bit, but the council report that came last Monday with respect to the Housing Accelerator Fund proposed, one of the initiatives was to look at some of the employment areas and to determine whether or not it was feasible to allow for a greater variety of uses, including residential uses. So that will be, and actually, if we don't get the funding, we will likely proceed with that regardless, because we are doing an official plan review and update. So we will be looking at that, and that may create the opportunity for more, our initial analysis of how many units the City of Waterloo could provide was based on how much residential land we have available. If we increase that residential land through conversion of employment lands to additional uses, that could then actually benefit the whole program by enabling more units. So it's definitely something that's on our radar.
Thank you, Councillor Basic. Other questions from council? No? Okay. I just wondered, Michelle, if you could, because I read we had some correspondence from the Waterloo Region Home Builders Association, and just wondering if you could respond to the point, one of the points that they made was that the societal cost of inclusionary zoning, and that they said that costs should be borne by the general public and not new homeowners and renters. So I just wondered if you could provide a response to that question or position that the Home Builders Association had.
To you, Mayor. Yes, so there's two ways of thinking about it. There are those who have already purchased land for development based on their understanding of the zoning framework and official plan policies in place at that moment. And for those, there is absolutely a real risk of increasing regulation that can then have a significant impact on the feasibility of development, and therefore that cost will have to be borne in some way, and could very well be passed on to the market units. That is the main reason why we've tried to address that through very, very slow and low set-aside rates that ramp up over time, so that impact can be managed and minimized. Then there are the future buyers of land in the uptown and in other MTSAs. They will at that point have a very clear policy framework in front of them, not unlike any other zoning framework that places restrictions on what can be built, and that then goes into the analysis of what are the potential revenues for development. And that framework will help inform them when they're making transactions in the market. So they will be informed enough that they can make purchasing decisions that ensure that they're incorporating the policy requirements into their pro forma, and therefore they should not be required to pass any additional costs on to the other market units, because they've already accounted for that in their land purchases. So that is ultimately, like in the NBLC memo that was attached to this document, and then the previous report to council a few years back, that talked about a model that the consultant carried out for us to help us evaluate the pro forma impacts. That is ultimately the basis upon which this program works. The idea is that the program would put downward pressure on land value so that the development continues. That's where the cost is coming from. It's the paying of an appropriate amount for the land, recognizing the new framework that's in place. So that would be my response to the Waterloo Region home builders, that we feel we do definitely recognize that in the short term there would be a cost, and we're really trying to mitigate that. Over the long term, we feel that it can be managed through appropriate land market decisions.
Thank you very much. I think that's important clarification for us as council, but also for the community as well. Because seeing no other questions from council, just also like to say thank you very much for this. It's important policy. I really do appreciate the work that's been done with the other cities in the region, because I think it makes a lot of sense that this is coordinated across our municipalities so that we have similar standards and similar policies in place. I think that's, to a large degree what people are, or particularly developers are looking for when they're approaching these kind of decisions. So thank you for the work on that. So I will look for a mover, Councillor Bodley, and a seconder, Councillor Rowe. All in favor of the recommendations as presented? That is unanimous. Thank you so much, Council. Thank you, Michelle, for this. That's really very helpful. Okay, so the next item is the 2022 Consolidated Financial Statements prepared by Mary Zubert, and there's a presentation from Paul I'm forgetting how to say Henning? Hettinga. Sorry, Paul.
Perfect.
Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I've attended a couple convocations over the last couple weeks, and I've heard different pronunciations of it. But I pronounce it Hettinga, but Hettinga is fine as well. City staff and the city's auditors, KPMG, who Matt Beddick is here with us today, presented the audited statements to the audit committee on June 1st, and the committee passed a motion recommending that we bring these statements to council for approval. These statements are consolidated and include the results of the Waterloo Public Library, the Uptown BIA, and now the Innova Power Corporation, and formerly Waterloo North Hydro Holding Corporation, and that just shows as an investment. And the auditors are prepared to issue an unqualified audit opinion, which is a good thing. So the audited surplus not only includes the operating surplus to budget that we previously presented to council a month or so ago, but also items collected for current and future capital items and debt repayment, and several non-cash items that are not available for use. The largest of this is the gain on the merger of Waterloo North Hydro, which created a gain of $103 million. So this gain is a one-time activity that will not reoccur in next year's statements. It's created due to the market valuation at the time of the merger, which creates this book gain. Prior to the merger, the City of Waterloo owned 73.2% of Waterloo North Hydro Holding Corporation. Post-merger, we now own 30.83% of Innova Power Corporation. This investment in Innova Power Corporation is currently budgeted to generate a revenue stream of $3.6 million annually, which is used to offset tax-funded budget. Further revenue increases are anticipated and will be added into future budget cycles. The surplus has no cash value to the city to allocate to other initiatives, and would only be realized if we sold our interests in Innova Power Corporation, which is not recommended at this time. This slide shows the major revenue types compared to budget and the prior year. Some variances that I would like to draw your attention to User fees is improved over prior year, but still a little bit short on budget, and this is due to the lingering effects of the pandemic earlier in 2022. Development charges were below budget as well. This is due to the timing of capital projects that are funded from these reserves. Revenues aren't considered earned in the development charges world until we use the money. So we have to expend those on the projects that they're intended for. Other income was below budget due to anticipated land sales not occurring in the year. And then the gain on amalgamation or merger is the loan item on the last part of the slide there that has no budget or prior year amounts. On the expense side, we see a consistent delivery there as well. It shows major expenses compared to prior year and the budget. Most expenditures were below budget, which again is a good thing. Amortization is, I'll draw your attention to, we do not budget for that in the municipal world, but it is consistent with the prior year. This slide shows some of the key balance sheet items, assets and liabilities of the city. Some of the notable changes include the investment in Nova, which is about $110 million more than the prior investment in Waterloo North Hydro. We're also seeing continued investment in TCA, so that increased from $823 million to $849. And also on a positive front, we're seeing our net long-term liabilities and capital lease obligations decreasing, which means we're paying off our debts. This all led to an improvement in an overall financial position of the city at year end. Once approved, these statements will be available on the city's website. I'd like to thank the many staff across all departments involved in this annual process. It is a journey of basically the entire city across all departments, especially non-financial ones. And I'm happy to answer any further questions the council might have at this time. And Matt is also available to answer questions if you have any of KPMG at this time.
Great, thank you so much. Questions, council? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Wright.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. I'm just wondering, when I was reading through the notes, there was a line about the OMERS pension deficit, and just wondering if you could speak to that briefly.
Yes, the OMERS pension has been in a deficit for the last number of years. It has been decreasing over the last 5 to 6 years. I think it bumped back up due to market conditions at the end of 2022. But the fund has a path towards getting it back to a neutral position over several years.
Did you have a follow-up to that? No? Okay. Sure. Go ahead, Councillor Freeman.
If others have questions, I'm happy to wait. Okay. So I just wanted to thank staff and the auditors for their work on this project. It's always a great adventure for finance staff to go through the annual audit, and I appreciate all the work. The audit committee supported the recommendation that you see here. And the reason why Mr. Hedinga went into some additional conversation about the ANOVA piece was because it does stand out as an anomaly within the audited statements, and I thought myself and the other folks of the audit committee thought it was of value to kind of point that out and try to probe any questions that council might have on that. But if there's no other questions, again, thank you, and I'm happy to move the motion, Mayor McCabe.
Thank you, Councillor. So we have a mover. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Hamner, all in favor? Thank you. That is unanimous. Thank you so much. Great work to the audit committee, the auditor, and yourself, Paul. Okay. Moving along, we have the delegation of authority for heritage permits. Dominic Simpson. Welcome, Dominic. And there's a recommendation. Did you have any comments you wanted to make? No? Okay, council, there's a couple of recommendations attached to this. Do you have any questions? Yeah, go ahead, councillor.
I had a question. On occasion, it's happened in the past where the recommendation associated with a heritage permit was brought to council. So is there still a path for those to be brought to council if there's a disagreement?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor, yes, absolutely. So the intent of this delegation bylaw is to more or less deal with applications that are compliant with their heritage policies. So in any instance where staff or the Heritage Committee don't recommend approval or don't feel that it is compliant with our policies, then we would defer it to council for a decision.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I can tell council where my thoughts are coming from. There was a heritage motion for the old post office on the main street where I think the Heritage Committee had recommended the copper roof to be installed after it was already oxidized, but it was less expensive to just put fresh copper and let nature do its job. And so there was a disconnect there. And so council had agreed to allow the copper to go down and let nature oxidize it. And I just think some of those decisions were kind of important because there was another one associated with a women's shelter. And I just think that those were important to have brought here and didn't slow anything down, and it didn't put the committee in a position of having to make a recommendation that they couldn't stand behind. And I thought those were valued conversations in the public realm. So with that, I'm happy to move the motion, and thank you for the information.
Great, thank you, Councillor Freeman. Do you have questions, or did you want to second the motion, Councillor Bassett? Oh, okay, seconded by Councillor Rowe. All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Dominic. All right, so now we're into the public meeting portion, and we have general amendments to zoning bylaw. Tristan Devereaux, and there is no presentation, but there is a slight revision to the second recommendation. There is there is a presentation, Tristan. Sorry. Okay, sorry, pardon me. And I will just read the declaration for the procedures for a formal public meeting. So item 12A, zoning bylaw amendment application Z23-01, general amendments to zoning bylaw 2018-050. This is a formal public meeting to consider item 12A, zoning bylaw amendment application Z23-01, general amendments to zoning bylaw 2018-050. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you're assigning the appropriate one. And will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the motion and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on June 8th, 2023, and mailed or emailed on June 2nd, 2023, to public agencies, to all persons who signed in or spoke at the informal public meeting held on May 15th, 2023, and to all persons who requested further notice.
Thank you. So now we will have the planner. Tristan Devereaux will now give a brief overview of the application. Thank you, Tristan.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe. So yes, this is the formal public meeting for a general amendment to the zoning bylaw 2018-050. And the zoning bylaw amendment number is Z23-01. So I'll just give a very brief overview of the proposed amendments. I'm not going to go through every one detail by detail. It is included in the staff report that is in front of you. So again, just by way of background, current zoning bylaw was adopted in September 2018, and staff periodically undertakes general amendments to the bylaw in order to maintain its relevance and keep it up to date and resolve any issues that have been noticed as we work within the bylaw. This would constitute the fourth round of general amendments, and as was mentioned, there was already an informal public meeting held on May 15th of this year, introducing these amendment categories. The main objectives that we're looking at for this round of amendments, the bulk of the edits revolve around some changes as a result of Bill 23 and Bill 109 coming from the province. But in addition, there was a number of just basic housekeeping corrections and clarifications that we decided to take the opportunity to address since we were bringing these changes forward anyway. So the first kind of main category of amendments relate around additional residential units and coach house regulations. So currently the zoning bylaw refers to second residential units, which is a unit within an existing house, as well as coach houses. Changes to provincial legislation now state that any residential property can have up to 2 additional dwelling units, and that can be provided in various combinations. There can be 2 additional units within a single detached house. There can be a second unit as well as a coach house, or there could be a single detached dwelling and a coach house with an additional dwelling in it as well. So lots of different combinations, all provided by or permitted by right through provincial legislation. So the bulk of the edits to our bylaw is to reflect this new reality or to the new provincial legislation. So there's amendments throughout the entire bylaw to update all the relevant zones to make sure that it's clear that these uses are allowed. Renaming second residential units to additional residential units just to reflect the fact that there may be more than one. To remove restrictions around coach houses and where they could go. While they were permitted before, there was some strict geographical limitations on where they could go, so removing a lot of those. And just specifying, again, that up to 3 dwelling units, up to 3 residential units are permitted per property. And as per the provincial legislation, our zoning bylaw also reflects, in many cases, that this pertains to fully serviced lots within the city. The kind of next grouping of amendments is related to the Northdale residential zones. So currently, the Northdale residential zones are subject to a holding provision. Part of the process for removing that holding provision is site plan control endorsement, a conditional site plan control endorsement. We're removing that requirement mostly for timing issues related to Bill 109. So that regulation is being changed to just specify that the holding removal is contingent on through an urban design brief, the developer showing that their proposal is consistent with official plan policies, Northdale policy, or design guidelines and items like that, which would normally be presented or completely confirmed through site plan control, but it's kind of happening up front to have that documentation done for the holding removal, and then the site plan process will complete afterwards. And lastly, just a very group of kind of miscellaneous amendments, changes to spiritual uses within mixed-use buildings. We have a provision that talked about spiritual uses that gave setback requirements that didn't really make sense when talking about in context of a mixed-use building. So just clarifying that, clarifying when driveway widths are applicable in the bylaw. Site plan, if something is applicable to site plan control, the driveway can be assessed through that. But if something's doesn't go through the site plan process, we wanted to make sure that the driveway widths regulations were clear in the bylaw. So it's just adding clarity. Adding some regulations to the uptown mixed-use zones to deal with legal non-conforming single detached houses or single detached buildings, excuse me. Some changes to the R5 zone related to lot coverage, which wasn't previously defined within that zone, as well as clarifying some setback requirements that some setback relief that's embedded in the zone is meant to exist for single or existing buildings, not new builds. So clarifying that, as well as clarifying our landscape open space definition, which recent development applications have shown that there's been some lack of clarity on behalf of the development community about what should count as open landscape space and what doesn't. So we hoped to tighten that definition up. So as I mentioned, the full report goes through the amendments in detail and the recommendations to approve the amendments, and Schedule A of the report again goes through the exact changes that are being worded. And at that point, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Tristan. Questions from council? Councillor Bassick.
Thanks through you, Mayor McCabe. Thanks, Tristan, very much. Exciting that every property can have 3 dwellings. My question is about parking, and I'm thinking probably about the uptown too, but when you go into Ward 5, kind of up to the expressway, there's many houses where you can access public transit within a 1-minute walk, and then you're 5 minutes max to uptown where you can hop on the Ion. So just curious, is there any flexibility around the parking requirements for the additional dwellings?
Thank you for the question. Through you, Mayor McCabe. So currently the parking requirements apply across the city. They also reflect what's in the provincial legislation, where we can require 1 additional parking unit per dwelling unit. So that's what's being enforced currently with the bylaw. Any deviation from that would be looked at on a site-by-site basis. The current process would be they would have to apply for relief from the parking regulation, either through committee of adjustment or minor zone change, depending on what's appropriate based on what's being proposed.
Okay, and thank you. That's great to know the process if they were to request an exemption or, to be waived from it. Do you foresee that could change at any point in the future to put more flexibility within the legislation or policy, or is it going to probably stay like this for this process for the foreseeable future?
Through you, Mayor McCabe. So currently we're not actively looking at changing it. We do have a little bit of flexibility in the parking provision already where for example, for a new single detached building, the parking has to be provided. The requirements for where the parking is located is a little bit more strict, but when you're talking about additional units, a lot of the parking spaces can be built in tandem, which means you can have a legal space in the driveway behind. So there is a little bit of flexibility as to where it can be provided already. And at this point, staff's kind of feeling is to look at the exceptions on a 1-by-1 basis. Not to say that won't necessarily change in the future if we're getting a lot of feedback, but there's no current plans.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor McCabe. One of the questions I had was in the bylaws I see written, there's a lot of commentary about coach houses and their relationship with floodplain, but I didn't see in there with the addition of coach houses associated with septic beds. Because generally we say that you can't sever a lot and put 2 houses on a lot where there's no city sanitary services, and of course in like the C-154 exception for Colonial Acres is in here, and half of that neighborhood is all on septic. So it's like, how do we need to say that another coach house couldn't be built if the house is on septic? Like, I'm just trying to align those 2 pieces in my head.
Through you, Member Cape. So the requirements in the bylaw to say that in order to build a coach house, the lots need to be fully serviced implies that it does need to be connected to full sanitary. If someone is on a septic field or septic bed and they want to develop a coach house or additional unit, they would again have to go through a process, committee of adjustment, for example, and then through that process they would have to prove that it's appropriate.
Right. And then my other question was just practicality. I'm trying to think, if someone wants to build a coach house anywhere in the city of Waterloo, the lot fabric as listed for that particular zoning, meaning the setbacks from the side yards, the rear yards, it looked like you modified the impervious area a little bit, the coverage, the lot coverage in some areas, but do those things all have to be maintained? Otherwise, then they'd have to seek a committee of adjustment?
Through you, Mayor McCabe. That's correct. At this point in time, the only change that we made to the actual regulations pertaining to coach houses and additional units was in the coach house regulations, there was a maximum 10% lot coverage associated with that. So we removed that requirement, but all other setbacks and lot coverage for the entire lot that's in the zone, all those regulations will still need to be met. And again, if they're unable to, then they would have to seek relief.
Okay. I think that, I guess the only other question I had too was, although I recognize this bylaw is, the zoning is entirely different from licensing, but the anticipation would be that all these extra units would likely fall under our rental housing licensing bylaw as well. Is that true? Maybe I should be asking that of Mr. Dykstra. Oh,
Or
there's
Nicole, did
right
you wanna-
there. Sorry.
Yes, they would, from what is proposed, would require a rental license.
Thank you. And through you, Mayor McCabe, just my last question. I guess it's to whomever wants to take it. Just around destabilization of existing neighborhoods, is that a worry for staff? I know that when we looked at this before, there was some concern around that, and I wanted to refresh that question. Notwithstanding the fact that the legislation requires this to happen, I just wanted to know how staff were more broadly feeling about that.
Through you, Mayor McCabe. So certainly there are a couple angles that we have to look at this, and as you alluded to, the provincial changes do make it rather clear-cut that these are changes that have to be made in the bylaw. Even if we didn't make them in the bylaw, the provincial legislation takes precedence, so these allowances are allowed by right currently. Like I said, the actual performance regulations pertaining to the size of the units and setbacks, those are all still being maintained, and that's something that we can continue to monitor as things develop, and if changes need to happen, whether they need to be more restrictive, less restrictive, that can be something that can be examined as we see more coach houses get developed. Currently, there haven't been a lot of coach houses developed for us to get a first-hand knowledge of what the impacts may be. And then any development that's going to be outside of the allowance of the zoning, as far as setbacks and lot coverage and things like that, will be looked at through some sort of planning process. So we would look at the neighborhood context, we would look at potential impacts when we're assessing that information.
Yeah, I'll just check if anyone else has any questions. No, okay, go ahead.
The last
Nope,
question
that's good.
was
Go ahead.
whether or not a coach house could consist of a container vessel. Yeah, so there's another aspect in the bylaw that would prevent use of a shipping container as the primary residence.
Through your Member Cape, yet there's still a general prohibition on those containers in the city of Waterloo.
You said there's a general prohibition, correct? Okay,
That's
just wanted
correct.
to make sure I heard you correctly. Okay, thank you very much for that. Other questions? Seeing none, I would look for a mover and a, oh, sorry, we have a delegation. My goodness. Sorry. Thank you, Tristan. I will now ask any delegates who are in the audience to come forward, and if you would please provide your name and your municipality of residence for the record.
Thank you, Mayor McCabe and Council. Thank you for your time. You've put in a long day. I'll be short. My name is David Graham. I live at 407 Warrington Drive in the city of Waterloo.
Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, go ahead, Mr. Graham. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to speak specifically to the allowance of 3 dwelling units permitted on a residentially zoned property, and I'm not here to speak against it. In fact, I think greater density within the city is a necessity, and should be carried out in any way possible. As I said, I live at 407 Warrington Drive. I've lived there for 45 years, and 44 of those years have been pretty enjoyable. The last year has not, and the reason for that is because the house next door to us was sold and torn down and turned into two separate residences. Our concerns are, that is my wife and mine, are centered around the fact that to take advantage of that of the change, often a separate building or buildings or building with an addition are permitted on a lot that will usually be located in a previously fully developed residential area, such as ours. Often this construction qualifies as residential renovation. Even if an existing house is torn down and a new building is built on the old foundation, and that's exactly what happened to us. The entire house was torn down, nothing left but the foundation. A new house with 2 residential units in it was built on that, plus an addition, and it's all considered to be a residential renovation. If a residential renovation is carried out by the owner, as compared to a licensed a licensed contractor, that person can operate any kind of equipment they want and do any kind of construction they want 7 days a week, including Sunday. If a licensed contractor was doing it, they wouldn't be allowed that. What we're saying is that that's 7 days a week until 9 p.m. And so in the early evening, on a Sunday, I can't go out and enjoy my backyard like you may be able to, because there's somebody next door hammering or sawing or driving equipment around that, and it's excavation equipment that goes beep, beep, beep when you drive it backwards. And that goes on all day long, 7 days a week. The noise, that is hammering, sawing of wood, stone, and brick, the backup beeps of commercial equipment, the dust and air pollution can be devastating to neighbors who are literally driven from their homes, and that's what's happened to us. My wife often seeks opportunities to go and walk shopping centers because she can't bear to stay at home. Those neighbors could be frail and elderly shut-ins, working people needing the relaxation of a quiet weekend, or people working from their homes. They could be children wanting to play in their own backyards. Also, the work can go on for many, many months, plus time for demolition. And if you've got a private contractor, or if you've got a private individual who's doing their own construction, which is what we have with some family members, they often don't seem to know what they're doing. The construction goes on and on and on and on. As I said, we've been putting up with it for 10 months now, and it isn't close to completion. So, along with allowing densification, which I said I agree with, of the existing neighborhoods, I think council must take a look at the existing bylaws as to noise and building. Because you can't just make these changes in isolation. You have to consider the effect that they have on your neighborhoods. And the noise bylaw and the building bylaw just are not in any way in conformity with this change that you're suggesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. Appreciate you sharing that story with us, or the reality that you're living in your neighborhood with us. Just looking to council to see if you have any questions of the delegate. Okay, sorry, of staff, not of. Why can't we ask the? Okay, are there any questions from council? If there are no more delegations, this formal public meeting, sorry, hold on. This is incorrect. Which part am I asking? Okay, is there anyone else present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. If there are no more delegations, This formal public meeting is concluded and the application is now open for council for a motion and debate. Sorry about that, council.
That's okay.
Councillor
Thank you
Hamlin.
very much. Through you, Mayor, and I'm guessing that this will be a question for Ms. Papke, because it is around the bylaw, the noise and the noise and our other building bylaws and construction. So just turning the scenario that we've just seen, if you could make some comments on how we might address those concerns. Certainly they're not addressed in the zoning bylaw, but they do fall the other way. So your thoughts and comments on that, please.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Hamner, thank you for the question. So our current noise bylaw sort of defines residential renovations as work other than performed by a licensed contractor consisting of construction at a residential property by a person residing at the property with or without the assistance of other persons. This does not require a building permit. So that is what the provisions are with related to residential renovations. And it allows for Sunday operations where in other cases it would not, with not being permitted between 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. currently. So the intent, I suspect, was to permit those to do renovations at their home.
If I can follow on with it. So presumably to do after hours and respecting all of those things, could we take consideration, and if rest of council is in agreement at taking a look at that, given that we are going to be in a position where more residential units will be built on in existing neighborhoods, and I think just what is more friendly for the entire neighborhood and least disruptive. And I know we've got a lot of people to consider with this, but there should be a more commonality in the rules that are applying for constructions that are happening on existing spaces.
And that is something, through you, Chair, we could certainly take that back with staff and have a review of the noise bylaw.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there other questions from council? Councillor Rowe?
Through you, Chair. No, actually, Councillor Hanmer is exactly stated what I was going to ask of staff, so I appreciate that. And also, maybe just a clarification, if I could ask, the difference then between a new build and a renovation. It sounds like there's a little bit of a difference, so I just wanted clarification on that.
Can you respond to that, Nicole?
Through you, Mayor McCabe, is this with reference to noise? Yes. So a new build, typically with the building permit process, there are different regulations when a building permit's required, and typically when contractors are being utilized, outside contractors are being utilized for that new build. Is that?
Yes, that does help. But I'm wondering, I don't know if you can speak to this example specifically, but the type of situation where a house is taken down and the foundation is considered a renovation. Is there no building permit then required?
Yeah, I think that might be a question for Commissioner Ormson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor McCabe. Through you to Councillor Rowe. There is a requirement for a building permit in such circumstances, and as surprising as it seems, the Ontario Building Code Act does not allow a municipality to regulate noise, vibration, dust, or any other nuisance that would be associated with that construction. So it does fall to municipal noise bylaws and other means of control. We are working on some soft policies to try and encourage those conducting this type of construction to be respectful and to recognize the impact that they can have on their neighbors. But in terms of a legislative tool to regulate or stop that type of construction, unfortunately, the Building Code Act does not allow it as it's currently written.
Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Councillor Bassett.
Thanks to you, Mayor McCabe. I need a clarification because your question made me. Did you say that a building permit is required in those situations of a renovation, not a new build, or that it's not?
So for the provisions for residential renovations where it allows for Sunday operations, one of the requirements to have it be considered an exemption to that noise is that a building permit is not required in that particular case. So that would be investigated when the complaint comes in, if the requirement was there for a building permit, and our bylaw staff would consult with the building division to determine if there was a permit required for the scope of work based on the complaint, and then conduct the investigation from there.
So there's a bunch of substantial renovations potentially being done across the community without building permits? Sorry.
Is that a complicated question?
It's it's a question because this actually came up in the ward a couple of years ago, where it's very awkward not to look at you in the face, but when a situation came up and a neighbor who knows a lot about construction kind of flagged a property and said, this is not happening okay. City of Waterloo went in, found they didn't have a building permit, and then remediated a bunch of issues that were potential safety concerns. So just curious if you can speak to that a little bit.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Vasek. I'd like to think there's not a lot of illegal construction, but you're right. If it does occur and we become aware of it, the Building Standards Division through the chief building official has the ability to issue an order, a stop order, or any type of unsafe construction. They could issue an order to remediate that. In terms of these circumstances, though, I think part of the problem is that the Building Code Act doesn't also allow municipality to regulate the method, the pace, or the end date of construction, provided that the construction commences within 6 months of the issuance of the original permit. So that's another confounding issue, I think, in this case, in particular for Mr. Graham, is that the construction seems to be going on longer than it would had there be a contractor rather than the homeowner working on it themselves.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Vasek. Councillor Wright.
Through you, Mayor. Nicole, I'm just wondering if you can comment briefly on some of the timing gaps that municipal enforcement has on noise enforcement.
Sorry, through you, Mayor McCabe, timing gaps in terms of scheduling?
Yeah, like at the early times of the day and sometimes the late times of the day when people are bothered most.
Typically, I think I believe that we've had some complaints with early morning construction of high rises that have the building permit process in place, in addition to noise exemptions. And some of the challenges with those is that the scope of the noise exemption doesn't necessarily reflect the noise that maybe residents are experiencing. For example, a complaint that has been typical is the crews arriving to the site before 7 a.m., preparing, and then going up is not actually part of the scope of the noise exemption, but not a violation of the current noise bylaw either. So we typically, in that case, our teams would work to mediate with the companies doing the construction in addition to the residents, and typically we are able to resolve those. It can be challenging, but we definitely work through that in order for the project to continue. And sometimes the nature of the work they have to do, the timing, versus the needs of those in the community.
Thanks for that. I just happen to have been through this a few times. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hamner. Oh, okay. Okay, great. That was answered. Other questions? So, Council, I'm just wondering. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. I didn't see you, Councillor Freeman. Go ahead.
I just had a question. Like, when I look at the OBC, it looks like there are different jurisdictions that can put some level of expiry on it associated with inspections. So I think the Ontario Building Code says that a permit will expire if you don't request an inspection within 6 months. Is that a recurring 6 months?
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Freeman, yes, that's my understanding, Councillor, and there are a number of different thresholds for different types of inspections, whether it's plumbing, insulation, other types, roofing materials. There's other stipulations in the Building Code Act. But again, there's nothing that I'm aware of, at least, that a municipality can dictate when certain things are complete, except for when the municipality would be prepared to conduct that inspection. So if a builder, let's say, were to ask for an inspection of insulation and it wasn't complete, we would obviously not grant the inspection at that time.
Okay. So if I understand correctly, the only way we can deal with issues of this ilk is to modify our noise bylaw.
Through Mayor McCabe to Councillor Freeman, that's correct.
Okay. So I actually think there's value in undertaking this work in short order, and there's some other bylaw amendments that I would like to make later on in this meeting. So maybe we need to make a list.
Yeah. Well, in my question, thank you, Councillor. My question was going to be, are there any other bylaws that may need to be adjusted in order to address this concern that Mr. Graham has raised, and thinking that this may start to occur more frequently across our community? I'll just leave that way. We'll leave that with staff. But I guess, do you require, is that enough direction to take this away and look at it, or do you need a, okay, go ahead, Nicole.
Through you, Chair, to you, Chair. I think too, perhaps if there's going to be significant amendments to the noise bylaw community engagement piece, a broader, I understand maybe there is a desire for it to happen quickly, but I do believe that community engagement has proven to be very valuable, especially as we've heard tonight, for other matters. And so perhaps with that, there could be broader suggestions, because certain amendments could have broader impacts across the community as well. So
yeah, it's really a balance, because assuming that someone, works sort of a traditional day and then is doing renovations at their home, they will want to do it on the weekend or in the evening. So we have to balance that with the situation that Mr. Graham described, which, was continuous every day for months and months at a time, and finding some way to balance both of those type of situations and others that might arise. Councillor Freeman.
Just under a point of order, might I suggest we close this informal public meeting and then maybe deal with the direction to staff under new business? Does that make sense? Because any changes we might make won't be related specifically to the zoning bylaw changes. They'll be related to a separate piece. Would that make sense?
I will look to the clerk to see if that makes sense.
Certainly the formal public meeting has been closed, and I think council's considering the report now. So council could choose to consider it at the same time, but it may be more helpful to separate the two, the report from any sort of future directions, which makes it significantly easier in the event that there is any sort of appeal made to council's decision.
So you're suggesting that we take this piece and put it under new business?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Freeman and Julie. Any other questions, Council? Okay. Thank you very much. Where am I here? Thank you very much again, Mr. Graham, for highlighting this. And one other just thought with the communication piece is that, overall, we would like to let people know that some of these changes are going to occur, and people have the ability to, make coach houses or, et cetera. I think that's important for people to understand as well. Certainly, I've heard from people before that they're just not aware of what they're able to do or not do. So just maybe in part of the ongoing communications that we do to let people know of some of their options. Okay. So we're moving on to, sorry, my agenda is a bit out of order, to, I'm just trying to, my agenda got out. Yeah. Is the motion up? Okay. Because there was one slight change on the motion, because in the printed version, our printed version, there was 35, but this has been corrected to, correct? Is it, it's the correct one? Okay, so I'm trying to remember who moved this originally, or was it, okay, it hasn't been. All right, who would like to move this? I'm sorry, it's been a really long day. Counselor Bodley, seconded by Counselor Hamner. All in favor?
I have to read it.
Oh, okay.
Whereas council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved. 1, that council approve report IPPW 2023-035. 2, that council approve zoning bylaw amendment Z 2301, general amendments to zoning bylaw 2018-050 as set out in Schedule A to IPPW 2023-035. I will move that.
Thank you for speed reading. Okay, all in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, Councillor Bodley. So now we are on to 12B. This is a formal public meeting to consider item 12B, official plan amendment number 44-Bill 109, implementation, housekeeping. Any persons who want further notice of this application, including the passage of any bylaw, should sign the appropriate register in the binder located on the desk at the rear of the council chambers. If there is more than one binder, please make sure you are signing the appropriate one. Will the clerk please advise council of the method used to give notice of the meeting and the dates notice was given?
Notice was advertised in the Waterloo Chronicle on June 1st, 2023, and mailed or emailed on June 2nd, 2023 to public agencies and to all persons who requested notice. No informal public meeting was held.
Thank you. And our planner, Dominic Simpson, is here and will now give a brief overview of the application.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have a presentation for you today, but I just wanted to provide some brief introduction. So yes, my name is Dominic Simpson. I'm a policy planner with the city's growth management division, and with me as well today is Natalie Hardacre, the manager of planning approvals. So the formal public meeting and official plan amendment in front of you today pertains to Bill 109, the More Homes for Everyone Act, which was received royal assent in April of 2022. I know it can be kind of hard to track all the bills that the province has passed over the past couple years, but Bill 109, the most consequential change to the Planning Act was imposing timelines for zoning bylaw amendments and site plan applications. And if cities didn't make a decision on those applications within the statutory timeline, there's a refund of application fees provisions that apply. So that is 60 days for approving a site plan, 90 days for a decision on a zoning bylaw amendment, and 120 days for a decision on a joint zoning bylaw amendment and official plan amendment. And so with this new legislation, we've had to initiate this official plan amendment to update our development approvals process. So there's a number of housekeeping amendments that are proposed to streamline how we provide notice, how we circulate applications, requirements that are need to be submitted from applicants, and things of that nature. Another big point is that we are proposing to delegate a number of minor planning items to the Director of Planning, again, with the goal of streamlining development approvals. That's all for me. I'll be happy to take any questions, as well as Natalie's available for questions.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Is there anyone present tonight who wishes to speak to this application? Seeing none. Sorry, do I do this? I haven't done one of these before. So this one, okay, okay. So if there are no delegations, this formal public meeting is concluded, and the application is now open for council for a motion and debate. So, council, do you have questions of staff on this? Yes, Councillor Hamner.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. It's more a comment than a question. Thank you to staff who have taken a really hard look at our process and tried to map it towards the new requirements. And I think there's some efficiencies that are being shown in here, but I think we've been fairly creative in how you've come through what's going to improve our process, including the communication and how we're going to be allowing people to do their application. So I commend you for that. It's no easy task, and you've done it in fairly short order. So hopefully it's putting us in a position of, as a city, in a position of more leadership to be able to quickly review the applications that we get and do our part of it. So the actual getting shovels in the ground is not our issue. It becomes another part of the process. So thank you for what you've done.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? No? Okay. Do you? I would just add to Councillor Hamner's, yeah, we're going to time you, Royce, to Councillor Hamner's comments that, yeah, it is commendable the amount of, because there has been a tremendous amount of legislation tabled in the last few months or last year, and it has put an extreme amount of pressure on our planning staff in addition to, what's being devolved from the region and planning specialties that the region has that we'll have to now hire for or hire consultants for or sort through that. So I really do appreciate that, and because it's we want to get shovels in the ground, we want to get housing built, but we need to do it in a way that is appropriate for our community. And I do worry that the amount of potentially public consultation that is being challenged, that may be lost through this process. We do want to avoid the NIMBYism piece, which I think the legislation is trying to address. But but still, it's important to have balance with these things, and we still are waiting for the province to provide a significant amount of clarity with some of this legislation. And would call on them again, as we've done since these various bills have been introduced, to provide clarity that municipalities need so that we and the developers can move forward as expeditiously as possible. And I would just say, as I've said numerous times, and to the province, is that the municipalities, we play our part and we do our role, and I appreciate all the work that staff's put into this. But on the other side of it is that we need something in the regulations to say that once these approvals are in place and the municipality's work has been done and approvals have been given, that there really should be something there that to get the shovels in the ground as soon as possible, because we can only take it so far, and then it's up to our partners in the community, the development and the building community, to move it forward. So hoping there's something in the legislation that will deal with that side of the equation. But thank you again for all the work that staff have done knowing how much pressure you're under. So, okay. If there's no other questions or comments, I will turn it to Councillor Bodley to speed read the motion.
It's a long one. Whereas council has considered all written and oral submissions from the public and stakeholders, and whereas council has considered the professional opinions of planning staff, therefore be it resolved, 1, that council approve report IPPW 2023-031, 2, that council adopt official plan amendment number 44, OPA 44, Bill 109 implementation housekeeping amendment to the official plan as set out in Appendix A to IPPW 2023-031, 3, that council requests that the regional municipality of Waterloo approve official plan amendment number 44, OPA 44, 4, that council approve the corporate procedure as set out in Appendix B to IPPW 2023-031 regarding the withdrawal and lapsing of development applications. 5, that council approve a bylaw to delegate authority to the Director of Planning to A, pass bylaws under Section 34 of the Planning Act that are of a minor nature as enabled by Policy 12.2.17 as amended of the city's official plan, and B, approve exemptions under Section 40 of the Planning Act, parking exemptions, and to delegate authority to the Commissioner of Integrated Planning and Public Works to execute agreements and other documents under Section 40 of the Planning Act, parking exemptions as set out in Appendix C to IPPW 2023-031, subject to the form and content of such bylaw or agreement being acceptable to the city solicitor And 6, that council approve the hiring of 2 new senior development planners to be funded from staff savings in 2023, and that the financial implications of said positions be referred to the 2024 to 2026 operating budget for permanent ongoing funding.
Thank you, Counselor. I was timing that, just so you know. Give the man some water. Okay, so the motion's on the table. Do we have a mover, Counselor Vasek, and a seconder, Counselor Rowe? All in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, Council. Okay, so moving on to item 13, there are no notice of motions given at a previous meeting. There are no notice of motions. We have no communications and correspondence. We have no unfinished business. We are now on item 17 with questions. Councillor Freeman.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, I have a couple of questions for staff. So one is my returning request of council direction to modify the bylaw in public parks to expressly prohibit axe throwing. This has actually gotten out of control. There are now 4 or 5 very mature trees that are substantially damaged in this park at multiple heights on the trunk, and the tree bark is torn off and sap is coming out of these trees. Like they're not just marked. These trees are substantively damaged, and it has to end. And I would like to move a motion to direct staff to amend. I don't know which bylaw it is. I'm looking to our director of bylaw. Is it our parks bylaw? To amend our parks bylaw to expressly prohibit axe throwing in public spaces.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Nicole, did you have any response or anything you wanted to add to that? I'm just wondering if there's any other, if there's anything else we should expressly add.
Through you, Chair Mayor McCabe, to Councillor Freeman, we can do that immediately, in addition to perhaps some public engagement and taking it back to see if there are any further updates with park staff. Typically, we work with the park staff when there are incidents in the park or violations, so we can certainly potentially do some further public engagement with that as well.
We might need to post a sign at this particular park.
Yeah, and any changes to the bylaw, is that retroactive? Like to deal with this situation that Councillor Freeman's dealing with? Yes, go ahead, Julie.
Just for clarity for council's consideration, is the direction to direct staff to bring back to
Yes.
council parks bylaw?
Yes, thank you.
So that could be part of the report at that time.
Yep.
And assuming is there anything else that you need to help you with this situation to hopefully get it to cease and desist?
I think the reason that I'm suggesting we actually amend this bylaw is because this individual may choose to move to another place in Waterloo, another park. So they're also practicing in twilight or dark times when they're less visible to citizens. And I'm just worried that we could have more tree damage throughout the city. So I just think there's value in just putting this in our parks bylaw, and and the clerk is 100% right. So my direction would be to direct staff to bring back an amended parks bylaw that expressly prohibits axe throwing. And if someone could second that, I'd be very appreciative.
Councillor Roach has agreed to second that. So
Thank
I
you.
assume that all in favor with this. Okay, that is carried. And what's the timeline on that? I'm just wondering if it's possible to, in a timely enough manner, to try and deal with the current situation.
Through you, Mayor McCabe, to you. We can do our best to bring that particular amendment back. I can speak with the clerk and find out how quickly we could and process for that. Just to clarify as well, with the current situation, there are still provisions within the parks bylaw that we can issue the order prohibiting the activity as well. Even though it's not expressly indicated in the bylaw, there are other activities, and there's a catch-all phrase that we can certainly use related to this particular activity as we attempt to follow up with this particular.
Thank you, Nicole. And Councillor Hamner has a comment or a question.
Thank you. Through you, I would certainly encourage it to happen sooner than later. It's as Councillor Freeman's talking about it, it sounds like it's becoming a safety issue as well, in addition to the damage that's being done to the trees. So it worries me if it's happening in the early evenings or times when not everyone's going to be noticing. It could be quite devastating. So thank you.
Yeah, especially since there's kids are about to or are out of school and out in parks and et cetera. Yeah, so thank you very much for bringing that to our attention, and thank you, Nicole. You have another question? Sure.
Yeah, I have a couple of other questions. They're ward related. So the one is, I'd really appreciate it if I could get some kind of email or something from the forestry team to say they've looked at the trees in the park and that the trees are going to live or they're not going to live. And you're 100% right, Mayor McCabe and Councillor Hanmer, like the children are getting out of school, and this is a very, the region is the region's building a new affordable housing unit on one of the social housing sites there, and there's a lot of families and children that live there, and so the green space that they used to have to play on right in there isn't there, so they're going to cross the street and they will be in this park because it's their nearest green space. So yes, it would be very helpful, and I would like to be able to post something on the Facebook site to say that the forestry team has looked at the trees, and because it's causing great concern for the neighbors. They really value that green space. And the other piece I wanted to ask questions on was with regard to weeds and vines on Davenport Road. We've spoke about this before, and the access. We talked earlier today about accessibility to sidewalk spaces associated with snow clearing, and right now the sidewalk on Davenport Road is not accessible to individuals that live independently in the independent living center because of the amount of trees and vines that are overgrowing that sidewalk. The sidewalk is placed right up against a side fence, and there's all this stuff growing through. It really can't continue. So I'm hopeful that, the question is, when can we address this? I guess it's both for Mr. Dykstra and for the Director of Bylaw.
So I can take that initially through the chair to the councillor. Yes, the Director of Parks is aware of it. They are working on that. The Director of Municipal Enforcement and the Parks Director have met, so I'll turn it over to Nicole if there's any further updates on timing.
We are working through, because there are certainly specific areas where residents may be responsible in addition to double fences. The Director of Parks has indicated they could look after that, but we are going to continue to examine whether or not there should be some homeowner engagement in the event that fines are cut. Maybe they would prefer to do it themselves. So we will continue to work through that, but I will speak with him about the particular area you're referring to.
Thank you. I think that was all the questions that I have, but I do have some things under new business.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions, Council? Nope. Okay, moving on to new business. So we have the one item listed there of the regional all-council meeting, September 15th. Note that in your calendar. And over to you, Councillor. Oh, okay. Who would like to move? Okay, Councillor Bodley, and moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Freeman. All in favor? That is carried.
So thank you, through you, Mayor McCabe, under new business. Just a couple of things. Shout out to the East Ridge Neighborhood Association. They had about 200 people on Saturday for their food truck event, and so that was a nice neighborhood event that happened. Really a reflection of how lucky we are as councillors to have volunteers that run things in our neighborhoods. It's just awesome. I wanted to say that I was sorry that I missed the Senior of the Year awards, but I was at the awards for Waterloo Regional Police Services, and I just wanted to share it was a really humbling experience to be there that night and to see citizens receiving awards for bravery and taking initiative to save lives of people throughout this past year. And also a lot of the Waterloo Regional Police Officer teams received awards. And some of you might recall there was a pretty significant national arrests associated with child pornography. And that was really led by our team here at Waterloo Regional Police Services. So it was a really nice evening, and I was pleased to represent all of you at that event. I also wanted to shout out to city staff, transportation staff in particular, around the resurfacing that's finally happening in Colonial Acres. So for those of you who don't know, Colonial Acres, where I live, was a former township and the roads were tar and chip. And much of the neighborhood, as you heard me say, doesn't have sanitary sewers, and most of the stormwater is managed through overland flow. And so reconstructing roads in that area when people are in septic beds would never fit into our budget ever. And so by council's leadership in creating a landscape heritage in Colonial Acres, and that was really the heavy lifting by Michelle Lee, and it is our first heritage landscape in the city of Waterloo, we are able to basically constrain changes to the roads so that we were actually able to go in and do some resurfacing without it being in the 2055 budget. And I just wanted to say I'm so thankful for staff's support and council's support to create that landscape so that we could start resurfacing some of these roads that haven't seen any changes in over 25 years. So thank you to everyone for that. I'm getting kudos for this, but really it's a team effort. So I just wanted to share that experience. If anyone wants to ever see the neighborhood and understand what is weird about it or unique, shall we say, I'm always happy to do a walking tour.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything weird about any part of our community. Thank you, Councillor Freeman. Councillor Hamner.
Thank you very much. I too would like to give a shout out to the Westvale Community Association, who hosted their food truck day and fun event. Despite the raindrops on Saturday night, they managed to carry it off and had a good turnout from the neighborhood, which is great. My other item is, and I guess it will be captured, just our conversation about the noise bylaw review. Julie, that will get captured under new business. We don't need to further discuss it.
I'd look perhaps to the commissioners. I had heard at one point in the conversation there may be additional bylaws that needed to be brought up under new business, or is it sufficient for staff to just take that away?
Yeah, to the chair and council, we can take that one away. I think we had a fulsome discussion that we understand the parameters around the noise, and I think we have clarity too about some bylaw needs for the parks bylaw. So
Perfect.
I think we're good.
Just wanted to make sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamner. Councillor Vasek.
Well, I thought I didn't have anything for new business, but I looked at my calendar and I do. So, thank goodness. So the Button Factory Arts is holding its annual tulip fundraiser. So spread the word, and you can buy a bag for, I think, $15, which is a steal. Really, I mean, it's still money, but it's a steal, really, and it's a nice way to support Button Factory Arts. And Land Back Camp is hosting this Wednesday Talk with Teddy, a Two-Spirit and Indigiqueer 101 at Victoria or Willow River Park. And just so if anyone's interested in going, just to note that homophobia, transphobia, and racism will not be tolerated. So a very inclusive event. I'm looking forward to going and learning more.
Thank you, Councillor. I just wanted to clarify, for the previous discussion, did we need to add a motion around your points that you were bringing up before about this? No? Okay. That's been captured as well by staff? Okay, great. Just wanted to double check on that. Councillor Wright.
In the spirit of congratulating staff and neighborhood associations, I'd like to congratulate Parks on completing Alexander Park and for the efforts of the neighborhood team in supporting the grand opening that the mayor and I and Commissioner Dykstra all were able to attend. It was a very fun time and we managed to escape the rain while we were there. It is a beautiful park. So parks make people happy, and I'm happy to give everyone a shout out for that. Thanks.
Yeah, that was a good one. The park looks great. I'll give a shout out to Councillor Rowe for organizing the Walk with Refugees, which was on Saturday at kind of just before the start of the KW Multicultural Festival. So thank you again for your ongoing and long-term work supporting newcomers and refugees to our community. I think it's been 20 years or so that she's been working on that. So thank you for inviting me to join you at that. Okay, so we are at enactments of the bylaws. There are a number of bylaws here. I'm looking for a mover, Councillor Freeman, and a seconder, Councillor Hamner. All in favor? That is carried. Motion to adjourn, Councillor Bodley. Moved by Councillor Bodley, seconded by Councillor Rowe. That all in favor? That is carried. Happy summer, everyone. I will miss you very much on Monday nights.